So Joshua Schmidt posted, funnily enough, a day ago, do we even need a ban list? The day before a ban list dropped, which is kind of funny, and I do want to get into it. I think that overall, we were in a pretty good place format-wise. Like, we had a couple of stinkers in Dimension Shifter and like Kashira, but overall, I thought like the format was pretty good, if I had to say so myself. So I want to hear what a person who's actually good at Yu-Gi-Oh has to say about it.
Let's talk about the format a little bit before we move on. I personally think that this format looks pretty cool. Let's maybe talk about why these decks placed in the way that they did. Elephant in the room, why is Kashira down here? Why is Kashira at 12.5% in top cut? The deck hasn't changed, right? The other decks have improved. One thing I want to preface here is that I do not think the reason is that people are sick of playing Kashira.
I legitimately think that people just don't like playing certain decks. And I think that Kashira kind of represents that in this current format that we were in. Like, historically, you could sort of see that in a lot of formats. There's like one deck that's arguably like the first or second best deck, but its representation is pretty low relative to like what it should be in regards to like its power level and matchup spread, just because people either don't want to play it or it's just too complicated. Like, one of them is Dragon Link. Like, Dragon Link has always been around and it's always been like pretty good. Like, people just didn't want to have to learn like an insane hyper combo deck when they could just pick up like Sprite or Tier or like 50 other decks, because Dragon Link's been around since like fucking 2019. And another one is also like, again, like another Dragon Link variant, which is like Thunder Dragon, Crusadia, a bunch of combo wombo. And again, people just didn't really feel like they wanted to hyper invest into a deck that was arguably not even that much better compared to like Salamangreat or like Orcus Striker. Like, maybe the percentage is there by like a tiny margin, but again, like there's just some decks that people naturally do not gravitate towards, and one of them is like hyper combo decks, and the other are like super linear, super kind of boring decks like Kashira or like Labyrinth.
That was maybe the reason why many people didn't play it at regionals, for example. But I will say one thing, and one thing that I believe to be true 100%. When it comes to bringing a deck to a YCS, a person like Pack, a person like Jesse Cotton, these type of people, if Jesse believed that Kashira was the best deck, he would still play it. If Pack thought Kashira was the best deck, he would still play it. If they don't bring the deck to a YCS, it means that they don't think it's the best. I 100% believe that. I think it's mostly because they actually believe Unchained to be a better deck, which according to the results, it is. Part of the...
Yeah, I mean, who would have guessed that the deck that can push through negates like fucking nothing, as well as it doesn't hard lose to like shifter like effects, is pretty good. The thing that Unchained does really, really well that I don't think that the other decks are as capable of doing, except maybe like Kashira, is that Unchained has an amazing game 2 and 3. Like, its game 1 going first is still pretty absurd. Like, it's still pretty dominant, but Unchained in games 2 and 3 doesn't lose to a lot of the sideboard hate that exists for like Dragon Link or for Pearly or for Cash. Like, it doesn't lose hyper hard to Dimension Shifter or Book of Eclipse or like Book of Moon, where like Kashira, although it has like a pretty strong going second, it suffers extremely hard when you're putting it against, you know, people who are putting in Kaijus, Nibiru, Book of Eclipse, Book of Moon, Sphere Mode. Just like, there are so many cards that dominate when you just hard open them. Stuff like Droll Shifter, Book of Eclipse. In certain matchups, some decks, although they are like technically the best deck, aren't always the best decks to play, just because there's going to be a real higher than normal percentage of games where you're just going to get blown out. And I think that like Unchained is in a really special position where not only does it have a great game 2 and 3, but it also doesn't hard lose to anything.
Reason might be that Unchained is just a very solid deck against Kashira, I believe, because Unchained kind of has a lot of room for non-engine. I mean, we saw Jesse play Nib, Thrust, Books, a lot of stuff that you can fit with Prosperity in it as well, so you'll probably find it. You have a lot of ways to deal with the Kashira board, and literally every single deck right now is on like multiple books because they're so good against Kashira and Pearly. I mean, if you look at this meta breakdown, books are just phenomenal, right? Books are insane against Kashira. Books are insane against Pearly. Books are low-key okay against Unchained. Booking the Wave King Caesar is very nice for a lot of decks. And books are okay against Dragon Link, right? If you go first against Dragon Link, book is very strong. If you go second against Dragon Link, at least the book trades with the Savage negate, so it's all right. And Kashtira suffers from that. Kashtira suffers from all of these side deck tech cards or even main deck tech cards being very, very good against it. And also randomly good against everything else. Because I would argue if books were only good against Kashtira right now, you probably wouldn't main deck book anymore, right? But the fact that book is just solid or really good against all of this pie chart makes it so people can still main deck them, and it's just drive-by kills Kashtira. And like, honestly, playing Kashtira into this field seems very frustrating because you make your board going first and you expect to get it broken pretty much every time, right? Because you have no negation and everyone is on book, thrust, and whatnot in the main deck, right? It's like, it's kind of crazy. Kashtira has kind of naturally fallen off, which is very interesting. The more I thought about this, and I saw a tweet yesterday from Pac where he just tweeted Yu-Gi-Oh is nice right now, which looking at this breakdown, honestly, let me know what you feel, but it's looking good. Like, I'm actually looking forward to YCS Dortmund, even if we don't get a ban list. I'm like interested, I'm intrigued to test for this format. Like, it seems fine. There's nothing really here that I deem completely problematic. Unchained is a cool deck. Dragon Link is a cool deck. Pearly is a cool deck. Kashtira is kind of Troll Despair, but not too oppressive. The reason why Flu is here, by the way, I think, is that Flu is one of the few decks that completely doesn't give a shit about Unchained's endboard. And it also doesn't give a shit about Bystials. So that's why Flu is here.
Also, Dimension Shifter.
I'm guessing, right? So what I was wondering here, do we need a ban list right now? Which is a funny question to ask because it's been so long. It's been so long since we've had a ban list. I even made a ban list discussion, right? I uploaded a ban list discussion a couple weeks ago. Same shirt, by the way, disgusting. We discussed the ban list 2 weeks ago because I felt like it was about time to release a ban list. But I'm not sure if we need one because the format is looking completely fine. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say the format seems fine, I'm not saying everything is perfect. Okay? I still think there's a couple cards that I absolutely want to be gone, right? I'm still sick of playing against Kashtira, and I'm still sick of seeing a lot of anti-spells. I'm sick of seeing Dimensional Barrier. I'm sick of seeing Dimension Shifter.
Floodgates.
These kind of things.
Floodgates
there's still
are
cards
what
that
I
need to be
to
gone.
win.
Absolutely. The reason why
Floodgates are all I have.
I'm saying I could live with no ban list is that the format has changed more from Duelist Nexus than I expected it to. And I think I'm not the only one at that. I feel like it was not expected for the format to change as much as it did from Duelist Nexus, right? There's multiple decks from Duelist Nexus that, in my eyes, absolutely overperformed in these last 2 YCS weekends, right? Unchained, crazy performance. Pearly with the new support, very, very solid performance. Even Rescue Ace showing up here and there. We've seen Infernoble. Infernoble has top 8 at this YCS, by the way. The format has changed more than what we expected, or at least what
I'd argue that it didn't even really change that much. Outside of Unchained, Duelist Nexus didn't really even bring in that much new stuff. Like, everything that we thought was gonna be like insane about Duelist Nexus just ended up not even being like that crazy. Like, we all thought that Vanadium was gonna be the greatest deck of all time with Crimson Dragon. Spoiler alerts, wasn't even that good. We thought Vanquish Soul was also gonna be insane, or like ABC with like Revo Synchron was gonna be like crazy. Spoiler alerts, none of those decks were even that good. Like, I'd argue that a Duelist Nexus didn't even really do anything. It was just people rediscovered Unchained, as well as the fact that Konami printed the most batshit crazy Unchained cards of all time. We really undervalued Rescue Ace. That's also true. Rescue Ace is like really weird in the sense where it was a deck that felt like its entire existence was made to beat Kashtira or Pearly, and it could do literally nothing else. Like, it just feels so unplayable into certain decks. Like, you cannot play Rescue Ace and feel like you have a positive matchup unless you're exactly against Kashtira or Pearly. But then it just like flopped after people realized, should we play an entire deck to beat arguably the tier 1 and tier 2 decks and lose to everything else, or do we play Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse? And people chose the latter option, and then everyone started playing Unchained. So rest in peace, people who bought CR Fire Hydrants.
Duelist Nexus, which begs the question, is a ban list 100% necessary right now? And I would say it would still be nice, but it is not 100% necessary, which is interesting to me. It's just looking like Unchained is the top tier deck to beat for YCS Dortmund and also YCS Cancun. Just get rid of the toxic cards, please. Right, that's the thing. That's what I would love. It's like, Just hit Barrier, Anti-Spell Shifter, and Kashtira, and
Nah, we need to keep anti-spell. I need my D barrier. It's all I have left. How is Flu still here? There's a really cool card called Dimension Shifter that Flu gets to play. Also, the actual answer is the fact that Flu is kind of like Labyrinth, in which it doesn't really care what Unchained does. And it doesn't like turbo lose to like Book of Moon. It doesn't really lose to like the side deck hate that exists for Pearly and Cash.
literally cooking. Imagine how good that would be. And that's why I'm saying, like, we don't need one, but it would be really nice. Let's talk about how to hit Unchained. If they want to do a ban list and they want to put Unchained on it some way, shape, or form, please, Konami, do not hit any of the Unchained cards. The Unchained cards are absolutely fine. If you want to hit any cards that are being played in that deck, hit Prosperity. Prosperity is a 3 of an Unchained, a 3 of an Pearly, and a 3 of an Kashtira, and a 3 of an Fluanderies. That card is in almost any deck here, and it makes all of them way more consistent than they probably should be. And it's not just about consistency. If Pot of Prosperity was just a consistency card, I would be completely okay with it. You guys know I love consistency. I'm a fan of consistency. I don't like when decks lose just because they brick. I think a game that involves a brick is a very non-interesting game. It's not very skill testing, has nothing to do with playing good Yu-Gi-Oh, right? I don't want people to brick more. That's not what I'm asking for when I say hit Prosperity, right? Normally, I'm the type of guy to be all for consistency cards. But Prosperity is not just a consistency card, because Prosperity finds you every single card in your deck. That shit's not consistency. That shit's just wish for a card and manifest it in your hand. That's crazy, right? The fact that you can just go second and find thrust evenly, whatever, in any situation, you just manifest it in your hand when you go second. Then you go first, you manifest the floodgate, or a starter if you need it, or an extender if you get hand trapped, or whatever. I think Prosperity is just way too powerful. I think,
yeah, Pot of Prosperity reminds me a little too much of like Pot of Duality during like post-Edison format, where like every single deck, and especially a lot of decks that should not have been playing Pot of Duality, were just playing Pot of Duality because it's insane. It's fucking consistency. It's the most broken shit of consistency that there is, outside of just, you know, being a card that just says search your deck, Omega Lol. And I think that Pot of Prosperity's downside just isn't enough. Like, it should have maybe been like, you cannot access your deck for like the rest of the turn, like the turn you activate this. Like, you can't search or anything. What does Pot of Duality do? It's like Pot of Prosperity, except it's only 3 cards. You don't banish from your extra deck, and you can't special summon the turn you activate it. Instead of, you can't draw. By the way, combo decks were playing that card, which is insane. Because people are just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna add a tour guide, and I'm just gonna wait for an next turn.
it needs to be gone, because essentially, these decks don't just have 3 copies of Thrust. They essentially have 6, because Prosperity is so likely to
also
find
ban
it,
Thrust.
Right?
That card
all
is
of these
disgusting.
issues that people have with certain cards, right? People have issues with Thrust. People have issues with talents. People have issues with evenly matched sometimes.
Ban
all of those issues are
ban
so
literally every single card that he just mentioned right there. I'm surprised that Tactics and Evenly never got banned in any capacity. Those cards are like actively disgusting.
much smaller if Prosperity doesn't exist or is at 1 or whatever, right? Because it just amplifies so many other problem cards by putting more copies into a deck. You get anti-spelled so much more often because of Prosperity as well. Stuff like that. D-barrier. If I'm playing a deck and I go first and I open a playable hand and a Prosperity, I will just start playing, and then when my combos go through, I will just Prosperity, and I will probably find my dimensional barrier that I sided in, right? And then it's curtain, right? It's very, very crazy.
Anyways, yeah, overall I do agree a lot with Jay Schmidt. I think that a lot more Floodgate cards should have been banned, despite the fact that I am a Labyrinth player. I think that stuff like Shifter definitely should have gotten axed. I think that like Anti-Spell, D-Barrier, like those sort of cards definitely just should not exist alongside all the other like super sacky power spells. And like, I can kind of understand why Prosperity should be banned, but fuck it. I own 3 Prosperity. It's the only money card that I have. I sold my kids for the playset. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And yeah, that's gonna be it for this video.